Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was late in the evening, the mall almost empty except for a few stragglers finishing up their shopping. Sarah, a 22-year-old college student, was finishing her shift at one of the department stores. She'd always hated closing time, the long, empty hallways, the flickering lights, and the echoes of distant footsteps that seemed to go on forever. But that night felt different, unnerving, as if something was waiting for her. She quickly packed up her things and made her way to the back exit, cutting through the quieter parts of the mall. The main lights had been dimmed, and only the faint hum of fluorescent bulbs filled the air. As Sarah walked through the deserted halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, there was nothing but darkness, empty storefronts, and the soft creak of the mall's aging infrastructure. She reached the main corridor that led to the exit, but before she could push open the door, she heard something, a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere further down the hall. It sounded like footsteps, but they were too deliberate, too slow. Sarah's heart rate spiked. There were no security guards patrolling the area. They'd all gone home for the night. She stood frozen, her hand still on the door handle, staring into the shadows where the sound was coming from. The tapping stopped. A chill ran down her spine as she turned to face the hallway. The darkness seemed deeper now, almost suffocating, as if something was hiding just beyond the light. A whisper of movement. She could have sworn she saw a figure, hunched over, slipping through the gap between two storefronts. It was too fast to be sure, but it was enough to send Sarah's pulse into overdrive. She pulled the door open slightly, her eyes darting around for any sign of life. Nothing. Just the empty parking lot outside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, jolting her forward. She spun around, but there was no one there. The mall's emergency lighting flickered, and she found herself standing alone in the parking lot. But as she walked towards her car, a shadow caught her eye from the far corner of the lot. A figure standing unnervingly still by one of the abandoned entrances, watching her. She didn't dare move, too paralyzed by the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over her. Then a low voice, almost a whisper, carried across the still air. "You're not alone." Sarah's stomach twisted into a knot. She bolted for her car, locking herself inside the moment she reached it. She glanced up in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure still watching her. But the parking lot was empty now. Still, the eerie sensation of being followed stayed with her. As she drove away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the mall wasn't done with her, that something had been waiting for her there, watching her, and it would follow her, always watching, always waiting for the right moment to strike again. Later that week, Sarah ran into one of her coworkers, someone who had worked at the mall for years. She mentioned the strange incident, how she had felt like someone was following her. Her coworker paused, looking uncomfortable before speaking. "It happens sometimes," she said in a low voice. "Some of the mall's old tenants, they never really left. They say if you listen closely, you can still hear them walking the halls at night." Sarah's blood ran cold. She didn't know if she believed in ghosts, but after that night, she wasn't so sure anymore. All she knew was that she would never feel safe in that mall again. And she wasn't the only one. Several others had claimed similar experiences. Strange noises, flickering lights, and the sense of being watched even when there was no one around. The mall, it seemed, had a way of holding on to its past, its ghosts lingering in the shadows, waiting for the right time to remind the living that they were never truly alone.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be just another routine shopping trip for Jason. He had been looking forward to the quiet weekend, but his plans quickly soured when his wife suggested they check out a new mall that had just opened on the outskirts of town. The place was huge, brand new, with glass walls that reflected the sunlight and pristine tiles that gleamed under the overhead lights. It looked like the perfect spot for a peaceful afternoon. But as soon as they entered the mall, Jason felt a strange unease settle in his chest. The air inside felt too still, too perfect. There were hardly any people, just a few scattered shoppers moving in and out of stores. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, a constant, monotonous buzz that seemed to come from nowhere in particular. His wife didn't seem to notice anything odd, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As they walked deeper into the mall, they noticed that several stores appeared to be closed, despite the fact that it was well within business hours. Some storefronts had their windows covered, others were completely dark inside. Jason kept glancing around, his eyes lingering on one particular store, a small electronics shop tucked away in the far corner of the mall. It was eerily empty, no signs of life. But as they passed by, Jason thought he saw a figure in the window, standing still, staring out at him. He stopped for a moment, staring back at the figure. It was a man, dressed in a long coat, his face obscured by shadows. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. He quickly turned to his wife and suggested they leave that section, but she insisted they keep looking around. They continued to wander the mall, but as they did, Jason noticed something strange. The mall seemed to stretch on forever, its corridors looping back on themselves. The stores they had passed earlier seemed to have shifted locations, and the layout wasn't making sense. The longer they walked, the more confused Jason became. It was like the mall itself was changing, reshaping, trapping them inside. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out. Panic set in. Jason's heart raced as he fumbled for his phone to turn on the flashlight. The emergency lights kicked on, casting an eerie glow over everything. His wife grabbed his arm, whispering in a trembling voice, "What's happening? What's going on?" Jason didn't have an answer. He felt as though the walls were closing in and the air was growing thicker, harder to breathe. He turned around to head toward the entrance, but the corridor they had just walked down was gone. The mall had swallowed them whole. "Where's the exit?" Jason whispered, his voice hoarse. That's when they heard it. The sound of footsteps echoing through the dark, the unmistakable rhythm of slow, deliberate steps. Jason spun around, expecting to see a mall employee or some other person coming to help, but the hallways were empty. The footsteps continued, but they were getting closer, echoing all around them, as if the entire mall was alive with movement. Then, in the distance, he saw it. The man in the long coat, standing at the end of the hallway, staring directly at them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his dark eyes fixed on Jason and his wife. A cold sweat broke out on Jason's forehead. "We need to leave, now." He grabbed his wife's hand, pulling her toward what he thought was the entrance. But as they ran, the walls began to shift again. The doors and windows that should have been there were gone, replaced with endless rows of shops and empty storefronts. The man in the long coat was no longer standing at the end of the hallway, but Jason could still hear the footsteps, echoing louder and louder, as though something or someone was following them. Just as Jason felt like they were going to be consumed by the endless hallways, they stumbled upon a stairwell. With no other choice, they rushed up, hoping to find some kind of exit. But when they reached the top floor, they froze. The entire floor was abandoned, but in the center of it was a large, ornate mirror. It was out of place, old, cracked, its edges covered in dust. And standing in front of the mirror, gazing into it with an expression of sheer despair, was the man in the long coat. But this time, his face was visible. Jason gasped, his blood running cold. The man's face was familiar. He looked exactly like Jason, his own face, but twisted in a way that was wrong, unrecognizable. The eyes were empty, hollow, as if they had been drained of all humanity. A whisper filled the air. Jason couldn't understand the words, but they were coming from the mirror. A low, guttural voice, distant and yet right beside him. "Stay." The footsteps behind them grew louder, and Jason turned to run, but the stairwell had vanished. The only way out was through the mirror. The whisper came again, louder this time. "You'll never leave." They had no choice. They stepped toward the mirror. When they touched the glass, the coldness overwhelmed them. It felt like they were sinking into it, being pulled into the reflection. The last thing Jason saw before everything went black was his own face staring back at him. But it wasn't him. It was the man in the long coat. The next morning, the mall was found completely abandoned. No sign of any disturbance, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. And the mirror? It was gone.
Story number 3.
It was an unusually quiet evening at the mall. Ryan had just finished his shift at the food court and was on his way out when he realized he'd left his jacket in the back room of the store. The mall was practically empty by now, only a few employees and a handful of customers who were rushing to finish their shopping before closing time. He took a deep breath and headed back toward the food court entrance, ready to grab his jacket and leave. As he walked through the deserted halls, he couldn't help but notice how eerie the mall felt. The lights were dimmed, the air heavy with silence. The usual hum of chatter and background music was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to hang in the air. It felt like the mall itself was holding its breath. Ryan made his way down a narrow hallway that led to the back of the food court. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered sporadically, casting strange shadows on the walls. As he approached the employee-only section, he heard something, faint, almost imperceptible at first. It was a whisper. Ryan paused, straining his ears. The whisper grew louder, sharper, as though someone was trying to speak to him from just around the corner. He looked down the hallway, but there was no one there. He dismissed it as his imagination and shrugged it off, continuing on his path. But then the whisper came again. "Ryan?" His blood ran cold. It wasn't a trick of the mind this time. Someone was definitely calling his name. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward, his heart thudding in his chest. He peered around the corner of the hallway and froze. At the far end, near the storage closet, was a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing completely still. It was a woman, but she was oddly distorted. Her body seemed to sway ever so slightly, as though not entirely anchored to the ground. Her face, or what he could see of it, was hidden behind long, matted hair. "Ryan," she whispered again, and this time her voice was clearer, more urgent. Something in Ryan's gut told him to run, to turn around and get out of there as fast as he could. But he couldn't. His legs felt like they were glued to the floor, his body paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of dread. "Come closer, Ryan," the figure beckoned, her voice almost hypnotic. It seemed to reach into his chest, pulling at his soul. His heart raced, but he couldn't move. Before he knew it, he found himself walking toward the figure, step by step, against his will. The air around him grew colder, the mall's familiar sounds fading into nothingness as he approached. The woman's voice seemed to swirl around him, her words turning into incoherent murmurs as she grew nearer. When he was just a few feet away, the woman finally raised her head. Her face was pale, too pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into Ryan's soul. Her lips curled into a twisted, eerie smile, and her hands, long, skeletal, and unnaturally thin, reached out toward him. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered, the voice now laced with anger. Ryan stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. "I didn't leave you," he stammered, but his words were lost in the suffocating silence. The woman's smile widened, and for a moment, he thought he saw something else behind her, something darker, something that should not have been. Her fingers brushed against his arm, and the world seemed to go black. Ryan awoke to the sound of distant footsteps. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself back in the food court, slumped against a table. The mall was now fully dark, the lights having turned off after closing time. He blinked, disoriented, trying to piece together what had just happened. But the feeling was unmistakable. The air was thick with a presence, and it wasn't just the silence that made it eerie. Something was watching him, something that had been waiting. He stood up shakily, his mind still racing, but as he turned to head toward the exit, something stopped him. In the reflection of the glass doors leading outside, he saw it. The woman. Her face was pressed against the glass from the outside, her hollow eyes staring directly at him. But what terrified him the most was the fact that she was not moving. Her expression remained frozen, locked in that same twisted smile. Ryan bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. He pulled frantically at the handle, panic rising within him. Behind him, he could hear the soft sound of footsteps once more. They were slow, deliberate, and then, in the reflection of the door, he saw her again, standing right behind him. But this time, her smile was gone. Instead, her mouth hung open in a gaping, unnatural shape, her teeth sharp and jagged, her eyes wide with something that could only be described as hunger. She let out a low, guttural growl, and Ryan realized too late that he wasn't just facing the woman anymore. He was facing something far worse. With a final desperate pull, the door burst open, and Ryan fled into the cold night, not daring to look back. The moment he stepped outside, the footsteps stopped. The air felt heavier now, suffocating, as though something unseen was still chasing him. He never returned to that mall, but every now and then he'd hear the whisper again, soft but unmistakable, "Ryan." And when he looked into a window or a reflective surface, he swore he saw her face there, watching, waiting, always waiting.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be a quick trip. Lisa had just moved to the city, and the mall was the closest place to buy the few things she needed to settle in. She didn't expect it to be anything out of the ordinary, just another shopping trip. But as soon as she stepped inside, she felt a strange unease settle in her stomach. It was as if the air itself was thicker, more oppressive than it should have been. She brushed it off, chalking it up to the stress of moving, and headed to the first store. The mall was old, far older than most of the other ones in the area. The floors were worn, the lights flickered occasionally, and there was a smell in the air, faint but sour, like something had been left to rot somewhere in the building. As Lisa walked past the shops, she noticed that a few of them seemed strangely vacant, their windows fogged up or covered by heavy drapes. There weren't many people around either. A few scattered shoppers, and that was it. She didn't think much of it until she heard the first scream. It was faint at first, just a distant, gut-wrenching cry that made her stop in her tracks. Lisa turned toward the direction it came from, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the hallway stretching ahead, the dim lights casting long shadows along the walls. She shook her head. It was nothing. Just her imagination running wild, she told herself. But then it came again, louder this time. A high-pitched scream filled with fear and pain. Lisa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound was unmistakable. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely more than a whisper. There was no answer, just the hum of the air conditioning and the faint shuffling of footsteps from somewhere deeper in the mall. She hesitated, then decided to investigate. It was probably just a prank, maybe someone having a laugh, but she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut that something wasn't right. Lisa made her way down the hallway where she thought the screams had come from. As she walked, she felt like the mall was becoming more twisted, its layout growing more unfamiliar. The hallways seemed to stretch longer than they should have, the shadows deeper and darker than before. She passed several shops that had been boarded up, the signs of the stores barely visible under layers of dust and grime. She rounded a corner and suddenly found herself standing in front of a large, old-fashioned elevator. The metal doors were slightly ajar, just enough to see the dark interior beyond. The scream came again, this time directly from the elevator. It was raw, frantic, a cry for help. Without thinking, Lisa reached for the elevator door and pushed it open. Inside, the lights flickered, but there was no one in the small space. Just an empty, cold metal box. A chill ran down her spine as she stepped closer to the elevator, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. She noticed something strange in the corner of the elevator, a small piece of cloth, soaked in something dark, laying on the floor. It was torn, like someone had struggled to get out of the elevator. Then the door slammed shut behind her. Lisa gasped, whirling around, but the elevator wasn't moving. It had simply trapped her inside. She tried to push the emergency button, but it was unresponsive. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, everything went completely black. When the lights returned, she was no longer standing in the elevator. She was in a completely different part of the mall. The layout had shifted. The shops that had been there moments before were now replaced with blank walls. The floor was cracked, and the lights overhead buzzed in a broken rhythm, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Her heart raced. She was sure she had just been standing in front of the elevator, but now she was miles away from it. The air felt thicker, suffocating, and there was a distinct smell of decay in the air, stronger than before. Then she saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hallway. It was tall, hunched, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was struggling to maintain control of its body. It wore an old, ragged coat, its face hidden by a tangle of matted hair. As it got closer, Lisa could hear the unmistakable sound of ragged breathing. Her body froze in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but the figure was getting closer, closer. Its eyes were dark holes, voids of blackness, and the closer it got, the more Lisa felt herself being drawn into those eyes. Without thinking, she turned and ran. She ran down the hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence. But no matter how fast she ran, the mall seemed endless. The hallways stretched on forever, looping back on themselves, as though she was trapped in a never-ending maze. The figure was still following her, its slow, deliberate steps keeping pace with hers. No matter how hard she tried to escape, it was always there, closer with every step. Finally, she found herself back in front of the elevator. The doors opened on their own, and without thinking, Lisa stepped inside. The moment the doors closed, everything went black. When the lights came back on, Lisa found herself standing in the same part of the mall where it had all started. The halls were quiet again, the oppressive atmosphere gone. The shops were all open, the lights flickering in their usual dull glow. And then she heard the scream again. This time she realized something. It wasn't just one scream, it was hers. The realization hit her like a slap to the face. Lisa hadn't just been hearing someone else's cry for help. She had been hearing her own, echoing from somewhere in the depths of the mall. The scream that had drawn her in. The scream that had trapped her in this endless loop. And now, as the lights flickered one last time, she knew that she would never escape. She was part of the mall now, lost forever, and her screams would continue to echo, unanswered, in the dark.